Oh, this looks like an interesting one. The magic cap. The magic cap, inspired by an old Swedish tale. Now the words are by Flavia Whedon and Lisa Whedon Gilbert, and the pictures are by Flavia Whedon. So she made words and pictures. Once upon a time, a mother and her young son lived in a tiny cottage near a forest. Although they were very poor, their home was warm and filled with love. So nice. The mother worked very hard, sewing for the wealthy neighbors, baking bread and pies for their fancy parties, and taking on whatever odd jobs they would give her. Okay, here's a great book and a wonderful story. The Magic Cap. The Magic Cap, inspired by an old Swedish tale. The words are by Flavia Whedon and Lisa Whedon Gilbert. And the pictures are by Flavia Whedon. Once upon a time, a mother and her young son lived in a tiny cottage near a forest. Although they were very poor, their home was warm and filled with love. That's nice. The mother worked very hard sewing for the neighbors, baking bread and pies for their fancy parties, and taking on whatever odd jobs they would give her. But at night, when her work was done, she and her son would sit by the fire, sharing stories and dreams and precious time. The boy didn't have all the toys and playthings that the neighbors' children had, but he never complained or wanted for more, because he knew he had something far more valuable. One day, in the midst of a very cold winter, the mother took whatever scraps of thread and yarn she could find and made her son a cap. This will help keep you warm when you go outside to gather wood, she said. It is not fancy, but it is made from my heart. The little boy was very pleased with the cap and thanked his mother over and over. He knew that she needed a cap more than he, but he graciously accepted it because he knew how happy it made her and because he loved her so much. Every time he put the cap on his head, he felt a strange and wonderful feeling come over him. Whatever it was, it made him feel so good inside that he decided the cap must be magic. Excitedly, he told everyone he knew. One day, he decided to go for a walk in the forest. On his way, he met a farmer who had already heard of the magic cap. After all, news like that travels very quickly through a forest. "Young man, I will trade you my warm coat for your cap," the farmer said. "It's very cold, and my coat will be of much more use to you than that cap." The boy, although he needed the coat, said, "No, thank you, sir. I could never trade my cap for anything. You see, my mother made it for me." Suddenly the farmer grabbed the cap and put it on his head. He began to run away, with the boy running right after him. Then, just as suddenly, the farmer stopped, threw the cap back at the boy and said, "This cap is not magic. I feel nothing special when I wear it. You foolish boy! It's just an ordinary old cap." The boy caught the cap and quickly put it back on his head. Once more that wonderful feeling came over him, and he was happy because he knew the magic hadn't gone away. The farmer doesn't understand, he thought to himself. Surely he has made a mistake. This cap of mine, it is magic. He continued to walk through the forest, and by nightfall he found himself beside the king's palace. He saw many guests dressed in their finest clothes, going up the stairs to attend the king's ball. One of the guards at the palace door, having heard of the boy's magic cap, quickly ushered him through the door and inside the palace. Once inside, the boy was noticed by the king. When the king saw the boy's cap, he approached the boy and said, "I will trade my crown for that magic cap." But the boy replied, "I'm sorry, your majesty, but I cannot trade anything for my cap. You see, my mother made it for me." "If you won't trade for my crown," the king said, "then live here in the palace so that I might sometimes wear your magic cap." But when the boy refused and tried to leave the palace, the king stopped him. The king desperately wanted the cap, and he was used to getting everything he wanted. So he quickly ordered a servant to take the cap from the boy. The servant did so, and just as quickly, the king placed the cap upon his head. He stood there wearing the cap, but no magical feeling came over him. Embarrassed and angry, the king ordered the boy and his cap thrown out of the palace. "You are a liar and a fraud," he shouted. "There is no magic at all in this cap." Wow. Crying, the boy began to run home. He was hurt and confused, and he couldn't understand why no one else could feel the magic in his cap, or why anyone would treat him so unkindly. On his way back through the forest, the boy was approached by a wise old woman who asked him why he was crying. At first, the boy feared that she too would try to take his cap, but her gentle ways convinced him to stop and tell her his story. The old woman listened, understood, and smiled tenderly. She took his hand and reassured him that the cap really was magic after all. But the magic existed only for him. That wonderful feeling is love, she said. The kind of love that is known only to giving, gentle hearts. This made the boy think of his mother, and he smiled because he understood what the wise woman was saying. The love in his heart overflowed, and he couldn't wait to be with his mother. He thanked the old woman and ran home, holding tightly to his cap. When at last he arrived at the small cottage, his mother and a neighbor boy were standing outside. He ran up to his mother, threw his arms around her, and told her all that had happened. His mother smiled, just as the wise old woman had, but the neighbor did not. Instead, his neighbor said, "You fool! You fool! You could have been rich for the rest of your life if you had traded that plain old cap for the king's crown. Don't you understand? And if you had lived there in the palace with the king, you could have bought 1,000 caps and had all the toys in the world." The boy just looked at his neighbor and said, "But it is you who do not understand. The love I know my mother put into this cap when she made it just for me gives me such a good feeling inside. And that's the magic of it all. That is why no one else ever felt the magic when they tried to wear the cap." "I could never trade it for anything," the boy continued. "And don't you see? I don't need riches and I don't need to live in a palace. I have a mother who loves me more than anything in the whole world. And that makes me richer than any king could ever be." As the neighbor walked away, the young boy hugged his mother, and she kissed him, and together they walked to the cottage. The little boy and his mother had learned something their hearts already knew, that the giving of love itself, the greatest magic of all. And that night, as they sat by the fire to exchange stories and dreams, the little boy's cap seemed to shimmer like gold. The end.